Arcadia is the homeland of the Fae, where banality and mortal bodies are but horrifying nightmares to scare childlings. The idea of Arcadia serves as hope for changelings, hope that the gates to their homeland will open once again, and although all Kithain have at least a few memories from having lived there during the previous age, no changeling knows how much of this remembrance is real and how much is wishful thinking or fancy. In the end though, what is real when discussing dreaming? Hello, and welcome to a new lore video on Changeling the Dreaming. In the last video, we discussed the mythic history of the Kithain, and in this video, we'll continue that discussion, so if you missed the first part, you can watch that here. In the 13th century, an eclipse covered much of the autumn world, with all light being blotted out in the dreaming. Panic over further human growth slowly spread in the courts, so to protect themselves, some Fae moved their holdings into the dreaming to avoid contact with humanity, and in the process acted to further sever bonds between the dream and the flesh. While the sundering occurred over a long period of time, the shattering happened fairly quickly, following the increasing stranglehold that Abrahamic religions held on the minds of mortals, the loss of true dreamers to the stake and gallows, and the seclusion from the autumn world. The bonds between the planes quickly deteriorated as banality spread. Over the course of the next 2 centuries, trods, the paths and highways of the dreaming, and freeholds, places of fairy power free from banality, vanished, were destroyed, or were otherwise lost to the Fae. The courts went to war to determine who would control stable areas of the dreaming, while freeholds continued to disappear, and it all culminated with the outbreak of the Black Plague. Death and despair fueled the darkest regions of the dreaming, sending forth vast numbers of nightmarish creatures to besiege the Fae, who were already preoccupied with their own internal conflicts. In the early 14th century, the autumn world entered a new era that would eventually transition into the Renaissance. As scientific methods began to explain what mortals previously considered magic, the common folk took to the church's teachings, forswearing their old ways in exchange for salvation and a steadfast faith on which to cling in the darkest days. Increasing numbers of gateways shattered, and the Fae realized they would have to make a choice that would determine their destiny forever. Many retreated into their domains in the autumn world and sealed all connections with the world outside of their own accord. Locked inside their unchanging realms, they grew mad from their own glamour, transitioning into beings other Fae would come to call the Lost Ones. Most of the ruling Fae fled to Arcadia through the last remaining portal, while forcing commoner Fae to wait while the influential secured their own survival. These escapes were not orderly, and frantic battles at the gateways delayed departure from the autumn world, adding to the unnecessary casualties of the shattering. Fae who realized that they wouldn't make it through the portal, or who had lost any safe haven within the dreaming, made the choice to undergo the Changeling Way, a magical ritual that entwined the fairy soul with the mortal coil, transforming their immortality into an endless cycle of rebirth. Now hiding in the veneer of banality, the Kithain, or changelings, awoke to a harsh new world. The cataclysmic events initiated by the shattering continued to decrease the dreaming's influence, and many changelings described the sensation as if the autumn world itself attempted to suffocate their very souls. The church continued its efforts to rid the world of unwanted influence, and vast numbers of changelings attempted to circumvent discovery by hiding in plain sight. As the 14th century ended, the Renaissance blossomed, bringing a renewed flow of glamour to the autumn world. Changeling society reflected the alterations in the mortal world, and when merchant classes grew in power, many commoners abandoned old titles and customs, intent on modernizing their classical feudal paradigm. Some Fae, unable or unwilling to adapt to this shift, took to the road, wandering from location to location or taking work as caravan guards or traveling artists. The age of exploration revived a sense of curiosity in the Kithain, and some joined navies in hope of discovering fragments of the dreaming in places untouched by banality. Excitement over and dreams of marvelous discoveries among the mortals were reflected in the dreaming by the restoration of shattered trods, making it possible for the Kithain to once more visit locations inside the dreaming. Artists such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo infused the world with glamour, alongside writers like Shakespeare. The Age of Reason proved a double-edged sword for changelings. While hiding in the mortal guises of soldiers, politicians, artists, and craftsmen, the Fae enjoyed glamour of musicians and poets, while allowing them to secretly move against humanity and guiding them carefully from the shadows. At the same time, many of the new dreams that filled mortal minds left no place for the wondrous and the magical, relegating the existence of changelings to fairy tale nonsense. Villages grew into towns, while towns became cities, and farmers turned into workers of the industrial age. At first, glamour flourished as technological advancements made life easier for the common man. Wondrous new gadgets and objects entered the market in a steady flow. But the downside of these fantastic developments was the smoke, the dreary and difficult lives in factories, and the spreading of diseases as cities continued to expand and attract citizens from across counties and nations. By the turn of the 20th century, late in the Age of Romance, the world shifted again, and slowly but steadily in the advantage of banality. Following the outbreak of the Great War, changelings joined mortals in the battlefield on both sides, and the dark, bitter glamour born of it briefly surged before banality drained even the most vicious Kithain of almost all hope. The war brought up old grievances between the courts, briefly increasing tensions, but mortals brokered peace and the survivors returned to rebuild the ruins of their old lives. Although the Roaring Twenties gave a brief respite from banality's grip, the Great Depression diminished glamour once again. Works of art, literature, and poetry emerged during this period, but for the changelings trying to find a scrap of glamour in the blighted wasteland of the American West, the era was especially bleak. The Depression segued into the Second World War, and once again, changelings found themselves pressed into service as soldiers. While the propagandists on all sides tried to cast the war as a glorious expression of national pride and duty, the realities of war quenched the spark of glamour in almost all who fought. Changelings went to battle. Undone Kithain returned, little different than their haunted, shell-shocked mortal comrades. Following the Second World War and the horrors inflicted on humanity, many mortals felt as if the future died on the battlefields. Though there would be a future, it took years before humanity dared to dream again. Following the post-war baby boom, dreams of rebirth and possibilities surged through the autumn world. Television entered living rooms, allowing humanity to explore worlds beyond imagination. While the 1950s had its downsides, the decade laid groundwork for grander visions with glamour slowly trickling from the autumn realm back into the dreaming as humanity began to envision the possibilities of exploring space. Despite the continuing wars and the generational clashes of values and morals, the 1960s steadily renewed the autumn world's connection with the dreaming. As the space race continued to spur the two sides of the Cold War conflict, technological advancements that benefited humanity at large followed in its wake. The new generation's adherence to the ideals of being free spirits and daring to dream about a different world made it easier for glamour to amass. Banality's grip on mortal minds eased as the space race intensified, and on July 20th, 1969, humanity witnessed the moon landing live on television, and all of the hope, fear, and wonder of the previous decade burst forth. Across the world, all with fairy sight witnessed ancient trods manifesting on land, on sea, and in the air as the centuries-gone she-rulers returned on magic steeds and in chariots of light and darkness. They emerged in all corners of the world, and balefires burnt brighter than since before the shattering. For a brief moment, everything in the world had a chimerical quality, but centuries of amassed banality muted it and immediately closed the gateways to Arcadia. In the next Changeling the Dreaming lore video, we'll continue discussing the history of the Kithain into modern knights. I make World of Darkness lore videos multiple times a week, so if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Now remember this, Kithain. It is dangerous to dream too little.